On the morning of March 7, 1981, inside a basement office at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, Thomas Mitchell held a decoded Soviet transmission in his hands and recognized his wife's handwriting in the margins of a photographed document. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. He had been married to Sarah for 11 years. They had 2 children. She made pancakes every Sunday. And now, staring at the intelligence intercept on his desk, he understood that everything he knew about his life had been a performance. The paper trembled slightly as he set it down. His throat felt dry. The Soviet-coded message had been intercepted 3 days earlier from a KGB residentura in Vienna, part of routine signals intelligence collection. Mitchell's job was to decode and analyze Eastern Bloc communications, a position that required top-secret clearance and absolute reliability. He had done this work for 7 years without incident, translating the mechanical language of espionage into actionable intelligence. But this morning, buried in a batch of photographed documents accompanying the transmission, was something that made his chest tighten and his vision narrow. It was a page from an internal CIA assessment on Warsaw Pact troop movements, classified. Eyes only. And in the upper right corner, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for, was a small notation in pencil. 3 letters and a number, written in a flowing script he had seen on birthday cards, grocery lists, and notes left on the kitchen counter. The same handwriting that had signed their marriage certificate. The same hand that had touched his face the night before. Mitchell did not move. He did not call anyone. He simply sat there, listening to the blood pulse in his ears, understanding with cold clarity that the woman he slept beside each night had been feeding classified information to Moscow. And worse, that he would now have to decide whether to report her or protect her, whether to destroy his family or betray his country. The choice was not really a choice at all. But for 30 minutes, alone in that basement room with the stale air and the locked filing cabinets, Thomas Mitchell allowed himself to imagine that it was. The Cold War did not announce itself with sirens or explosions. It arrived quietly, in the form of suspicion, in the slow erosion of trust, in the understanding that anyone could be the enemy. By 1981, the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union had calcified into a permanent state of tension. Nuclear arsenals capable of ending civilization sat ready beneath the earth and beneath the sea. Proxy wars burned in distant jungles and deserts. And in the capitals of both empires, intelligence agencies waged a silent war fought with documents, microfilm, dead drops, and betrayal. The Central Intelligence Agency had been created in 1947 to counter Soviet espionage and prevent another Pearl Harbor. By the early 1980s, it employed thousands of analysts, officers, and operatives whose job was to penetrate the Iron Curtain and understand the intentions of an enemy that spoke in code and moved in shadows. The work was tedious and methodical. Analysts like Thomas Mitchell spent their days buried in reports, sifting through intercepted communications, looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for the single thread that, when pulled, might unravel an entire network. The Soviet Union, in turn, operated one of the most effective intelligence services in history. The KGB's first chief directorate was responsible for foreign intelligence operations, and it had spent decades embedding agents within Western governments, military organizations, and intelligence agencies. Some were ideological converts who believed in the communist cause. Others were blackmailed or bought. And some, like Sarah Mitchell, were something more complicated. Sarah had been born in Iowa. Her father was a school teacher. Her mother worked at a library. She grew up in a town where everyone knew each other's names and nobody locked their doors. She went to college in Wisconsin, studied languages, and graduated with honors. In 1968, she moved to Washington, D.C. to work as a translator for the State Department. She was good at her job. She was quiet and dependable. And in 1970, at a reception for Foreign Service officers, she met Thomas Mitchell, a young intelligence analyst who had just returned from a posting in Berlin. They married in 1971. She left the State Department and took a position as a contract translator for the CIA, working from home on unclassified documents. It was not glamorous work, but it allowed her to stay close to the world she understood. Thomas advanced steadily through the ranks of the agency's Soviet division. They bought a house in McLean, a modest two-story colonial with a small yard and a maple tree out front. Their first child, a daughter named Claire, was born in 1973. Their son David came 2 years later. To anyone who knew them, the Mitchells were unremarkable. They attended school plays and neighborhood barbecues. Thomas mowed the lawn on Saturdays. Sarah volunteered at the children's school library. They argued sometimes about money or the children's schedules, but never loudly. They seemed, in every visible way, to be living the life that millions of Americans lived. Comfortable, predictable, safe, but beneath the surface, something else had been happening. Something that began years earlier, in a way so subtle and so carefully orchestrated that even Sarah herself might not have recognized the moment when she crossed the line from innocent contact to active betrayal. It started in 1976 at a conference on comparative linguistics held at Georgetown University. Sarah attended as part of her work, sitting through panels on translation theory and Slavic grammar. During a coffee break, she struck up a conversation with a visiting professor from Vienna, a man in his 50s named Emil Kovac, who specialized in Czech literature. He was charming and well-read. They discussed Kafka and Kundera. He asked about her work and she answered vaguely, mentioning only that she did translation for government agencies. They exchanged pleasantries and parted. 3 months later, Kovac wrote to her a friendly letter, thanking her for the conversation, asking if she might be interested in collaborating on a translation project. He was working on an anthology of post-war Czech poetry and needed someone with a strong command of English. The pay was modest, but the work would be intellectually rewarding. Sarah agreed. It seemed harmless. Over the next year, they corresponded regularly. Kovac sent her poems to translate. She sent back drafts. He praised her work and suggested small changes. Gradually, the letters became more personal. He asked about her family, her interests, her views on politics and literature. She found herself writing longer replies, enjoying the intellectual stimulation that her daily routine lacked. Kovac seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. He never asked anything inappropriate. He was simply a kind, thoughtful man who appreciated her mind. In 1977, Kovac invited her to Vienna for a conference where the anthology would be presented. Sarah hesitated. She would need to travel alone. Thomas could not leave his work. But Kovac assured her that the expenses would be covered, and she told herself it was a professional opportunity. She went. Vienna was beautiful. The conference was small and academic. Kovac introduced her to other scholars, took her to cafes and museums. On the last night, over dinner at a restaurant near the Danube, he asked her a question that seemed casual but was not. He wanted to know what she thought about the direction of American foreign policy, whether she believed the Cold War could ever truly end, whether people like her who understood both worlds might have a role to play in building bridges between them. Sarah gave an honest answer. She said she believed in diplomacy, that she thought both sides were trapped in a cycle of fear, that ordinary people on both sides wanted peace. Kovac listened carefully and nodded. Then he said something she would remember for the rest of her life. "People like you," he said quietly, "are the only hope we have." He did not ask her to do anything. He did not mention intelligence or secrets. He simply planted a seed. And over the months that followed, through more letters and occasional phone calls, he nurtured that seed with care and precision. He introduced her subtly to the idea that information was not the same as betrayal, that sharing certain things, small things, things that might help prevent misunderstanding or miscalculation, was not treason, but conscience, that she could be a bridge, a voice of reason, a guardian against catastrophe. By 1978, Sarah had begun passing documents. Not often, not anything that seemed critically sensitive, just copies of assessments or reports that crossed her desk during contract work. Things that, she told herself, would help both sides understand each other better. Kovac never paid her. He never threatened her. He simply expressed gratitude and made her feel that what she was doing mattered, that she was part of something larger than herself. She told herself she was not a spy. She told herself she was preventing war. And for 3 years, no one suspected. Thomas Mitchell sat at his desk and tried to think like an analyst instead of a husband. The document in front of him was clear evidence. The handwriting matched. The notation was a reference mark used in CIA internal workflows, something only someone with access would know. The photographed page had been transmitted from Vienna, which meant it had been passed to a Soviet handler there. The timeline fit. Sarah had traveled to Vienna twice in the past year, both times for what she described as translation work. He could feel his pulse in his temples. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing through scenarios, through explanations, through desperate attempts to find another answer. Perhaps someone had stolen her notes. Perhaps the handwriting was coincidental. Perhaps he was wrong, but he was not wrong. He had spent his career analyzing evidence, learning to separate wishful thinking from reality. And the reality was that his wife had been compromised. Whether she had been coerced or seduced or ideologically converted did not matter in this moment. What mattered was that classified information had reached Moscow through her hands. He stood and walked to the door, locked it, returned to his desk. He needed to think carefully. If he reported this immediately, Sarah would be arrested within hours. The children would be taken into protective custody. His own career would be destroyed, not because he had done anything wrong, but because the agency would never fully trust him again. He would spend the rest of his life answering questions, taking polygraphs, living under suspicion. If he did not report it, he would be complicit. He would be allowing an active security breach to continue. And if it was ever discovered that he had known and said nothing, he would go to prison. There was no third option. He pulled a legal pad from his drawer and began to write. Not a report. Not yet. Just notes. A timeline. When had Sarah traveled? What documents had she had access to? Who had she been in contact with? He worked methodically, forcing himself to be clinical, to treat his own life as if it were a case file. An hour passed, then 2. At some point, his supervisor knocked on the door. Mitchell called out that he was working on a complex decode and needed quiet. The knock did not come again. By noon, he had constructed a rough picture. Sarah had likely been recruited slowly, over years. The handler was probably Kovac or someone using that name. The documents she had passed were mostly analytical, not operational, which explained why the damage had not been immediately catastrophic. But damage was damage. Soviet planners would have used the information to refine their own strategies, to understand American intentions, to stay one step ahead. Mitchell closed his eyes and thought about his daughter. Claire was 8 years old. She played soccer and loved to read. She had Sarah's eyes. David was 6. He was shy and serious and spent hours building elaborate structures with blocks. They had no idea what their mother had done. They had no idea what was coming. He thought about the morning 5 days earlier when Sarah had asked him how his work was going. He had told her, as he always did, that it was classified. She had smiled and kissed his cheek and said she understood. And now he wondered how many times she had asked that question with purpose. How many small pieces of information she had gathered over breakfast or during late-night conversations when he was too tired to be careful. He thought about the night they met, at that reception in 1970. She had been standing near the window, holding a glass of wine, looking out at the city. He had walked over and made some awkward comment about the weather. She had laughed. It was a genuine laugh, unguarded and warm. He had fallen in love with that laugh. And now he had to decide whether to destroy her. He left the office at 6 that evening, driving home through traffic that felt surreal in its normalcy. Commuters sat in their cars, listening to radio, thinking about dinner. The world moved as it always had. Only he carried the knowledge that his world was ending. Sarah was in the kitchen when he arrived. The smell of roasting chicken filled the house. Claire was at the table doing homework. David was on the floor with his blocks. It was a scene from 1,000 other evenings, and it felt like a lie. "You're late," Sarah said, glancing at the clock. There was no accusation in her voice, just observation. "Got buried in a decode," Mitchell said. His voice sounded normal. He was surprised by that. She smiled. "Well, dinner's almost ready. Can you help David wash his hands?" He picked up his son and carried him to the bathroom. The boy's weight in his arms felt heavier than it should have. He turned on the water and watched David scrub his small hands with soap, chattering about something that happened at school. Mitchell made the appropriate sounds, the encouraging noises of a father paying attention. But his mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, trying to find a way through the impossible. At dinner, they talked about ordinary things: Claire's upcoming field trip, David's refusal to eat vegetables. Sarah mentioned she had been invited to a conference in Toronto the following month. She said it casually, the way she always did. Mitchell nodded and asked questions about the dates and the topic. He watched her face as she answered. She was comfortable, relaxed. She did not know that he knew. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah came to bed and lay beside him in the darkness. She reached for his hand, a habit they had maintained even through the busy years of child-rearing. Her fingers were warm. "Long day?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," he said. "Complicated stuff. You can't talk about it." "No." "That's okay," she said. "I know it's important." He stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of her words. Did she mean it innocently? Or was there something else beneath the surface? Some hidden awareness that she was being careful, that she was playing a role? He could not tell anymore. The paranoia that defined his professional life had infected his marriage. Every word now carried potential meaning. Every gesture might be performance. "Sarah," he said, and then stopped. "Yeah?" He wanted to ask her directly, to confront her and demand the truth, but he could not. Not yet. Because if he was wrong, if somehow all the evidence pointed to a conclusion that was false, then asking the question would shatter everything anyway. And if he was right, then asking would alert her, give her time to run or destroy evidence or contact her handler. "Nothing," he said. "Just tired." She squeezed his hand and turned onto her side. Within minutes, her breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Mitchell lay awake until dawn, listening to the sound of her breathing, wondering how many other nights she had lain beside him carrying secrets. The next morning, he went to see Walter Brennan, the CIA's Deputy Director of Counterintelligence. Brennan was a man in his 60s with gray hair and the deeply lined face of someone who had spent decades dealing with betrayal. His office was austere. No photographs, no personal items. Just files and a secure phone and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Mitchell placed the decoded transmission and the photographed document on Brennan's desk. He explained what he had found. He kept his voice level and factual, presenting the information as he would any intelligence assessment. Brennan listened without interrupting. When Mitchell finished, Brennan picked up the document and studied the handwriting notation for a long time. "You're certain this is hers?" Brennan said. It was not a question. "Yes." "How long have you been married?" 11 years. Brennan nodded slowly. He set the document down and leaned back in his chair. "You understand what this means?" "I understand. Your security clearance will be suspended pending investigation. You'll be placed on administrative leave. Your finances, your communications, your movements will all be scrutinized. The assumption, until proven otherwise, will be that you are either complicit or compromised. I know. And your wife will be arrested. Today, if possible. We'll need to move quickly before she has any indication we're aware." Mitchell felt something cold settle in his chest. He had known this was coming. He had spent the entire night preparing himself for it. But hearing the words spoken aloud made it real in a way that thinking about it had not. "The children," he said, "will be placed with family services temporarily. Once we've determined the extent of the breach and your level of involvement, custody arrangements can be discussed. I want to be the one to tell them." Brennan shook his head. "That's not how this works. You're a potential security risk now. You'll have no contact with your wife from this point forward. Limited supervised contact with your children until the investigation concludes. This is not personal, Mitchell. This is protocol. Protocol, Mitchell repeated. The word felt empty. You did the right thing, Brennan said. I know that doesn't help. But you did what you were supposed to do. Most people wouldn't have. Mitchell stood. His legs felt unsteady. When will you take her? We'll have a team at your house within 2 hours. I'd advise you to stay here. Go to the commissary. Get coffee. Do not call home. Do not warn her. If you do, you'll be charged as an accessory. Mitchell nodded. He walked to the door, then paused. She's not a monster, he said quietly. Whatever she did, she's not a monster. Brennan's expression did not change. Neither was Kim Philby, he said. That's what makes this business so ugly. Mitchell left the office and walked through the corridors of Langley like a ghost. People passed him, colleagues he had worked with for years, and he wondered how many of them would look at him differently once they knew. How many would assume he had been part of it? How many would pity him? How many would despise him? He went to the commissary and bought coffee he did not drink. He sat at a table in the corner and watched the clock on the wall. At 9:47 in the morning, a team of FBI agents and CIA security personnel arrived at his house in McLean. Sarah was loading the dishwasher. The children were at school. She opened the door, expecting perhaps a package or a neighbor, and instead found 6 men in dark suits with badges and a warrant. Mitchell was not there to see her face when they told her. He was not there when they searched the house, pulling books from shelves and opening drawers and photographing everything. He was not there when they found the hollow book in her study. The one that looked like a thesaurus but contained a one-time pad and a set of instructions written in Russian. He was not there when they placed handcuffs on her wrists and led her to a waiting car while neighbors watched from their windows. He was sitting in the commissary, staring at cold coffee, when Brennan found him 2 hours later. It's done, Brennan said. We found enough evidence to hold her indefinitely. She's being transported to a secure facility for interrogation. Did she say anything? She asked about the children. That's all. Mitchell closed his eyes. What happens now? We begin the damage assessment. We interview you extensively. We trace every document she had access to, every trip she took, every person she was in contact with. We build a timeline and determine what she passed and who she passed it to. It'll take months, maybe years, and then she goes to prison. Or, if she cooperates, she might be offered a reduced sentence. That's not my decision. But given the nature of the breach, she's looking at significant time. Mitchell opened his eyes and looked at Brennan. She has children, I know. They're going to grow up visiting their mother in a federal prison. Yes, Brennan said. They are. The silence between them stretched. Finally, Brennan sat down across from Mitchell. I've been doing this a long time, he said quietly. I've seen every kind of betrayal there is. Ideological, financial, coerced. And the worst part is that they all start the same way. Someone convinces themselves that what they're doing isn't really wrong, that it's justified, that the rules don't apply to them. Your wife probably believed she was doing something noble. They usually do. Does that make it better or worse? Mitchell asked. Neither, Brennan said. It just makes it human. The interrogation of Sarah Mitchell took place in a windowless room in a nondescript building in Northern Virginia. The room contained a table, 3 chairs, and a recording device. 2 FBI counterintelligence agents conducted the questioning. Sarah sat with her hands folded on the table, still wearing the jeans and sweater she had put on that morning, still smelling faintly of the dish soap she had been using when they arrived. They began with simple questions. Her name, her date of birth, her employment history. She answered each one calmly. Then they asked about Vienna, about Emil Kovac, about the poetry anthology that did not exist. Sarah did not deny it. She seemed almost relieved to stop pretending. She told them everything. How Kovac had recruited her slowly, over years. How he had made her believe she was helping prevent war. How he had never paid her, never threatened her, simply made her feel that what she was doing was morally necessary. She described the dead drops, the coded messages, the documents she had photographed. She spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, as if she were describing someone else's life. The agents took notes. They asked for names, locations, dates. Sarah provided what she remembered. She had been careful, but not professional. She had kept no records. Everything had been done through memory and trust. The agents exchanged glances. This was worse than they had hoped. Without records, it would be nearly impossible to determine the full extent of the damage. "Why did you do it?" one of them asked finally. Sarah looked at him. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying because I thought it mattered, she said. I thought I was preventing something terrible. "Did your husband know?" "No." "Did he ever suspect?" "I don't think so." "I was careful. You weren't careful enough." Sarah nodded. "I know." They asked about the children, whether she had used them to carry messages or had ever put them at risk. She reacted with the first real emotion they had seen, anger mixed with horror. "Never," she said. "I would never involve them. But you involved your husband. I didn't tell him anything. You used his clearance, his access, his trust." Sarah closed her eyes. "Yes. Do you understand what you've done to him?" "Yes. Do you understand what you've done to your country?" She opened her eyes and looked directly at the agent. "I thought I was saving it," she said quietly. The interrogation continued for 6 hours. By the end, Sarah had given them a list of approximately 40 documents she remembered passing, though she acknowledged there might be more. She had described her meetings with Kovac and 2 other handlers she had met over the years. She had provided details about the communication methods, the signals, the protocols, and when they asked if she regretted it, she hesitated before answering. "I regret that I failed," she said. "I regret that I wasn't good enough to keep doing what I thought was right." The agent stared at her. One of them asked, "So you don't regret the betrayal itself?" Sarah considered this. "I don't know how to answer that," she said finally, "because I still don't think I was betraying anything. I think I was trying to save something. But I understand now that nobody else will see it that way." They took her back to her cell, a small room with a cot, a toilet, and a single bulb that never turned off. She lay down and stared at the ceiling and thought about her children. She wondered if they had been picked up from school yet, if anyone had told them what was happening, if they were frightened. She thought about Thomas and tried to imagine what he must be feeling. Anger, certainly. Betrayal. But also, she hoped, some understanding. Some recognition that she had not done this lightly. She did not sleep that night. Or the next. The interrogations continued. Different agents with different approaches. Some tried sympathy. Others tried intimidation. They showed her photographs of Soviet military installations that had been built based on intelligence assessments she had compromised. They explained how her actions had endangered American personnel overseas. They asked her over and over to provide more names, more details, more evidence. Sarah gave them what she could, but there were limits to what she knew. Kovac had been careful to keep her compartmentalized. She had never met other sources. She had never been told what happened to the information she passed. She had been, in the end, exactly what Moscow wanted her to be. A useful asset who believed she was something more. Thomas Mitchell underwent his own interrogation. It was gentler, more procedural, but no less exhausting. He sat in conference rooms and answered questions about his marriage, his security practices, his financial records. Polygraph examiners asked him the same questions in different ways, looking for inconsistencies. "Did you know your wife was passing information?" "No." "Did you ever suspect?" "No." "Did you discuss classified matters at home?" "Occasionally, in vague terms, nothing specific." "Did your wife ever ask direct questions about your work?" "Sometimes, the way any spouse would." The polygraph results were inconclusive on several questions. The examiners noted that Mitchell's stress levels were abnormally high throughout the session, which was unsurprising given the circumstances, but which also made it difficult to establish a reliable baseline. He was cleared to return to work after 3 weeks, but placed on restricted duty. No access to classified materials, no contact with foreign nationals. A supervisor reviewed everything he did. His colleagues treated him with awkward sympathy. Some avoided him entirely. Others offered quiet words of support that felt hollow. Everyone knew what had happened. It had been in the newspapers, though the details were carefully controlled. CIA analyst's wife arrested in espionage case. The story ran for 2 days, then disappeared beneath other news. But inside the agency, it was the only thing anyone talked about. Mitchell moved into a temporary apartment. The house in McLean was still being searched, every inch of it examined for hidden compartments or coded messages or anything else that might reveal the extent of Sarah's activities. He was allowed supervised visits with Claire and David twice a week. The children had been told that their mother was sick and needed to be away for a while. Claire seemed to sense that the explanation was incomplete, but she did not ask questions. David cried and asked when Mommy was coming home. Mitchell held him and said he did not know. The damage assessment took 4 months. Teams of analysts reviewed every document Sarah had handled, every trip she had taken, every communication she might have had access to. They interviewed her colleagues, her friends, her family. They traced the flow of information from her hands to Kovac to Moscow, reconstructing as much of the intelligence chain as they could. The conclusion was sobering. Sarah had compromised approximately 60 classified documents over a 3-year period. Most were analytical rather than operational, which limited the immediate tactical damage. But collectively, they had given Soviet planners a detailed understanding of how the CIA assessed Warsaw Pact military capabilities, which in turn allowed Moscow to adjust its strategies and conceal its true intentions more effectively. It was not catastrophic. It was not another Philby or Ames. But it was real damage, and it had gone undetected for years. The question everyone asked was how. How had a contract translator with limited access managed to compromise so many documents? The answer, it turned out, was disturbingly simple. Sarah had been careful and patient. She had photographed documents when Thomas brought work home, which he did occasionally despite regulations against it. She had memorized information from conversations, piecing together details over time. And she had exploited the trust that exists in any marriage, the assumption that the person you love is not your enemy. In July 1981, Sarah Mitchell was charged with espionage under the Espionage Act of 1917. The trial was closed to the public. The evidence was presented in classified sessions. Sarah's defense attorney argued that she had been manipulated, that she had believed she was serving a higher moral purpose, that she had never intended harm. The prosecution presented the documents, the dead drops, the handler meetings, and the simple fact that she had knowingly passed classified information to a hostile intelligence service. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found her guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was brief. The judge acknowledged that Sarah had cooperated with investigators and had shown remorse. But he also noted the severity of the breach and the damage it had caused to national security. He sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison. Sarah stood as the sentence was read. She did not react visibly. She had known this was coming. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she turned and looked at the gallery where Thomas sat with his arms folded across his chest. Their eyes met for the first time since the morning of her arrest. "I'm sorry," she said. Not to the judge, to him. Thomas did not respond. He simply looked at her, his face expressionless, and then looked away. Sarah was taken to a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. The prison was a low-security compound surrounded by fences and guard towers. She was assigned to a cell she shared with another woman, a forger serving time for bank fraud. They did not speak much. Sarah spent her days working in the prison library, cataloging books and helping other inmates with legal paperwork. At night, she lay on her bunk and thought about her children. She was allowed visits once a month. Thomas brought Claire and David 3 times in the first year. The visits took place in a large room with tables and vending machines and guards watching from the corners. Claire sat stiffly, answering her mother's questions in monosyllables. David clung to Thomas and cried. After the 3rd visit, Thomas stopped coming. He sent letters instead, brief updates about the children's schooling and activities. Sarah wrote back, longer letters that tried to explain herself, to make him understand why she had done what she had done. He never replied to those parts. He only acknowledged the questions she asked about Claire and David. By the second year, the letters from Thomas stopped. Sarah continued to write to the children, but she did not know if they received the letters or if Thomas kept them. She had no way to know. The prison allowed phone calls, but when she tried to call the number she had for Thomas, it was disconnected. She realized, slowly and with a grief that felt like drowning, that she had lost her family entirely. Thomas Mitchell tried to rebuild his life. He sold the house in McLean and moved with the children to a smaller place in Arlington. He changed jobs within the CIA, transferring to a different division where fewer people knew his history. He enrolled Claire in counseling. He learned to cook meals beyond the basics. He attended parent-teacher conferences and soccer games and tried to be present in a way that filled the space Sarah had left. But the damage was inescapable. Claire grew quiet and withdrawn. She stopped bringing friends home. She excelled academically but seemed to find no joy in it. David developed anxiety that manifested in nightmares and difficulty sleeping. Thomas took him to therapists who prescribed medications and suggested routines, but the fundamental problem was unfixable. The boy had lost his mother, and no amount of structure could replace that. Thomas himself moved through the days with mechanical efficiency. He worked. He cared for his children. He maintained appearances, but inside he felt hollowed out. The betrayal had not been a single moment, but a slow revelation that everything he had believed about his life was false. Every memory was now suspect. Every conversation replayed in his mind with new and sinister meaning. Had she loved him at all? Or had that been part of the performance too? He tried to hate her. It would have been easier if he could. But what he felt was more complicated. Anger, yes. Betrayal, certainly. But also a kind of exhausted sadness for what had been lost. Not just the marriage, but the possibility of trust. He had spent his career analyzing threats and identifying deception. And he had missed it in his own home.